So now we have our dinosaur model almost complete. If we look down here at the reference, we can see we have some extra details on the spine, and also obviously we need to create some teeth. We'll start by looking at curves again, only we won't generate curves from our normal tools that we've been using previously. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the existing edges that we have to generate curves. So here you can see I've gone ahead and selected these edges along the spine, and I'm going to use these edges now to generate a curve. The way I do that is I'll come over here to the curves menu, and I'll pull this menu to make it a floating palette here, and you can see from the list here I've got this option here which says create from selected edges. So I'm going to select this option, and you can see here that it's generated a new curve for me, and it's showing me the curve in the preview window. So I'm going to rename this one spine and deselect the original edges selection. So there we can see we have our curve object which was created from those edges. I'll turn on the axis here so we can see our origin and also our grid, and down here I've created a new object. So I'll turn the dinosaur off and show this object here, and let's zoom in, and you can see I've made this primitive object here exactly on the origin of the 3D space. Now the way I created this is simply going over to 3D primitives. I selected the sphere here and changed it from triangle to cube projected, and I just reduced the number of subdivisions here to 3, and then I just went ahead and modeled this primitive object into the shape that we can see here. Now when looking at the size of this spine object compared to the body, we've got a rough idea of how large these spines are going to be which run down the spine of our dinosaur. So now I'm going to use that curve called spine, and I'm going to use it to array these objects down the back of our dinosaur. So to do that, I'm going to hide the dinosaur body and leave open my spine, and I'm going to turn on that curve that we created. Next, I'm going to go down to here where it says array of copies. Now in the dialog box, I'm going to select a long spline here, which essentially means our curve, and I'm going to assign the spine curve that I created. And you can see straight away it's previewing in purple that spine object that I created. Now we haven't got enough in there at the moment, so I'm going to use quantity, and I'm going to increase the numbers like so. Let's say 30. Once I've done that, I'm going to say do array, and what happens now if I just turn off the curve, it's created an array of those objects along that curve. Let's bring the body back now. You can see that it's created those separately from our body layer. Now although this has been very useful, you can see that all our spines are even, and if we want to actually change these, maybe make some of them on the back here a little bit larger. So if I want to change this, I'm going to click on one of these spine objects. Let's move our gizmo down roughly to the base of that spine object, and now I'll just scale this one up and just rotate it and position where I want. So I would have to go in and do this for each one of these and adjust them accordingly. So here you can see I've adjusted the size and slight orientation of those spines along the back of our dinosaur. Here I've gone ahead and selected these inner portions of the mouth where the teeth could go. I've selected the upper and lower jaws. So again, we can repeat this process, going to curves and saying from create from selected edges. Let's close that down. Deselect our edges, and there you can see we have our curve 2, which is this upper one. And then if I select curve 1, that's the lower jaw there. At this point I can go into my curves tool and use Q menu, select move, and I can move these away from those original selected edges and maybe adjust them in their position if needed. Let's select the upper one and move this one maybe down slightly, or we could widen them and flatten them based on what we need, where we need those teeth to be located. In effect, consider this as almost like a gum line for where those teeth will be placed. So I've gone ahead now and I've named the curves mouth, which is the container for both curves, and named the upper and lower curves respectively. So with the upper selected here, I'm going to enable this layer here where I've gone ahead in the same way I created that spine object, and I've gone ahead and created a tooth object. And if we zoom in here, you can see we have this tooth object in the origin. So what I'm going to do now is exactly the same as we did before. Let's hide the body layer and let's hide this lower curve. So with the upper curve selected in the mouth region, I'm going to go over to my array copies, and again we want a long spline, but this time we want to change this one to upper. Now I've got quite a few selected here, so I'm going to just reduce the numbers down, and we can see that although it's done a reasonable job, the orientation of the teeth is actually incorrect. So they are moving in the wrong direction. So this was because of my placement of that original tooth. So let me zoom in and show you the placement. So this tooth is effectively pointing down the Z axis. And if we look back at our preview of the array, we can see that that tooth is pointing down the Z axis here. So let's escape and drop this array tool for now. Let's go back to my select and choose my tooth object down here. With the transform tool now, I'm simply going to rotate this around so it's pointing down the X axis instead, and I'll line that up roughly in the center of that origin. Okay, so let's return back to our array tool here with our curve. We've got upper selected. Let's zoom in on the preview so we can see, and we can see now that that's much better on these back teeth here. But as we follow this around to the other side, you can see that we've got the same issue. So on the right side it was moving around correctly, and then it's followed that axis all the way around and finished off on the other side, which is not really what we want. Let's double check that by saying do array. Let's bring the body back, and we can see here that these teeth are correct on this side, but then on the opposite side they are in the wrong direction. So this is one of the issues with the array tool, that we have the array working its way around that curve but failing to understand that it needs to be in this orientation. We could try and split this curve into two and do two separate arrays, one on this side and one on that side, but again we'd have to go in and we'd have to change the orientation of that tooth layer to do that. So let's have a look at an alternative method. You may notice down here we have the same objects, both the tooth and the spine object. The way I did that was by simply selecting one of these objects in our polygroups and using these little dots on the side and dragging that into this polymodels category here. By doing this, it gives me the opportunity to place these individually onto my model. So let's bring back the dinosaur model. We'll start off by selecting this object here, and I'm going to go over to my brush tool. So I'm going to go over to 3D primitives here, and I will select add new object for primitive and click to place in this options dialog box. So now I'll select this object, and now when I click you can see that it places a preview of that object where I clicked. If I increase the size of my brush, I will now get a larger version of that. Now notice that it doesn't place them down, it just relocates the position of the proxy object here every time I left click the mouse. Increase the size of the brush and position and create a very large spine on there. Let's decrease again and bring back this to a more reasonable size. And I can come into here with the symmetry active and I can manipulate these points and change the shapes of that model in real time before I commit. So although I've got this basic model down here, it doesn't mean I'm limited to that shape. I can come in here because I have my lattice, this object around here. I can come into here and change these shapes very subtly, just so that it's not looking too uniform. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit apply, and you'll see that it places on the new layer a custom object. Now at this point, I can now go in and click a new position and scale a new one on here. Apply. And it's a good idea to put this to a keyboard shortcut and keep clicking and creating new ones. If I don't want to change any of the properties, I can just simply click and position like so. So this is an alternative method where you have a little bit more control over the placements, but it is a little bit more time consuming to do it this way by manually adding. But again, just by increasing the size, I can have different ones positioned in here. So let's try this again, this time with the teeth. So let's look at the teeth and use the same technique. I've removed the tooth object from this palette here, just so we can see that process. So if I show the tooth object where it was created, which was, as we know, at the origin here, all I'm going to do is take this layer and drag that layer into this palette here, and then there I have the preview of the tooth. Now I can turn this one off, the original, and maybe make a new layer, give it a new name of teeth, where all the teeth will be positioned and placed. Let's zoom into the head here, and I'm going to choose 3D primitives, and then I'm going to click on this tooth object that I created, and you'll see that I've got a number of options here where I can change. So let's start off. I've got my brush here at this size, and I'm just going to click where roughly I want to put that tooth. So it may go there, and it may not be in the right location. I can click transform. So this will give me the widget here that I can position it exactly where I want it. Now you'll notice as well on this object that I have this lattice. It's like the small box that's surrounding everything with these small green dots. And on the lattice you can see I've got these cage numbers. And if I increase this cage number, you'll see that the lattice changes. It gives me more control over this particular object. So for example, in a very basic way, I can change this. So I could move these points around, or I can select an edge and move that edge around. Or if I want a little bit more control, let's say for example I want to put more of a bend in this tooth, I'll increase, in this case, the Y value. It resets all those movements that I've done so far, and if I select now, I can use this edge of the lattice here and put a little bit more bend in this particular tooth. Remember, this is only a proxy preview. So this now enables me not only to position the teeth individually, but also customize each tooth placement. Now it's always a good practice before you create this object down in this palette. When you're creating the original object, it's important that you UV that object, because then every tooth that you place will inherit a UV map, and therefore you can create a image for that UV which will be used on all the teeth, saving a lot of time. So I'll go ahead now and I'll position these teeth. So with that first one done, I'll hit apply. I'll use the transform and then position the next tooth. Apply. And we can also just stretch these out just to give them a little bit of variation on here. Shrink this one down. Let's bring this one over and maybe make these ones a little bit smaller. We rotate that one around a little bit. So now I'll position the bottom teeth. Let's get the orientation correct on this one. Maybe make these ones a little bit smaller. And just continue the process. We can use all these transform elements on the tool as well as our lattice here. Now if we had different teeth, we could have a selection of different teeth. For example, if we were creating a more human skull, then we would have a range of teeth from molars to incisors at the front of the mouth. So we could establish a library of teeth here that we could use to position. So once that's done, you can go in here and change the angles of these if you want to and make them a little bit more unique. You've still got access to things like the brush tool that you could use to just change these around, maybe buckle a couple of these teeth or make more uniform adjustments to all of them here. Let's just hide the body so we're not affecting that body. So we're roughly dropping these teeth in here and just getting these positions roughly where we want them in a more organic. And the influence of the size of the brush here is influencing how much is moved around. I think these teeth are going to overlap, so although we're not going to animate this, we do need to make sure that these teeth here would be, when the mouth was closed, be going on the outside of these inner teeth here. So it looks to me as if they would be touching, which wouldn't be correct. We're just moving them out just a little bit. Okay, so once I've done this, I can collapse these down now. So if I just hold down Shift, and I can just drag these individual teeth layers that I have and just collapse them all down to a single layer. Something like that. We can still move them around, there's still no problem. We've still not lost any editability on those teeth. We can go in on a point basis here and just change the shapes if we want to. I think those are okay for now. So what I'll do on this layer now is I'll simply enable my symmetry and repeat that process that we did before. So I've just hit this button here to make a symmetrical copy over to the other side. Let's bring the body back here and we can see all those teeth are now placed inside that mouth. So I created an extra layer here called teeth. I'm just going to drag these ones now into that teeth layer. So now if I turn that on and off, you can see there are the teeth. They're still separated and that's good. They're good to go. So before we use the array method to position these spikes, and what I'm going to do now is just combine that with some of these larger hub spines here. So again, just moving these around and positioning them. We can scale them down and just to give a little bit more variation on this back. And don't forget, we can always just use our lattice here to change these around a little bit. Just grabbing this edge here, we can just make this a little bit higher. We can also use this local symmetry on here. So for example, I was just using this node here to move this around, whereas I can hit this local symmetry on here, and then I can change this object symmetrically as well. Hit apply, and then we can move over and position the next one. And if they're off center, like I've done here, it's no problem because they've all been positioned on their own layer, so I can just go in after the fact and realign these up should I need to. You can see here I was quite a way off there with the positioning of those, but like I said, it's no problem just to come back and realign those, which we'll do in a moment. So you can see here that I've added some extra spines on the back. We had our original ones that we created using the array tool, and these ones I've just manually placed and offset them to create this look that we have here. And I've combined all of these objects into a spines layer by just compressing and collapsing all those layers into a single one. This model is now ready for the next stage, where we will increase the resolution and add a little bit more detail before taking it into a sculpt environment where we can add even more details to that object. See you next time.